Today I'd like to talk to you about how to use computers in qualitative data analysis, and this is a more sort of theoretical understanding of how the computers are used. The more specific aspects of how to use the actual functions of the particular pieces of software we'll talk about in other videos, and I'll have you look at some of the tutorials from the specific manufacturers. But what I want to talk about is sort of general understandings about qualitative data analysis and the use of computers in them. Now, perhaps the most important thing that you should understand about all of what we call CAQDAS software, or computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software, all of the packages, in some way, they don't actually do the analysis for you. It's really more like data management software that helps you do the analysis. So I know especially people who come from a quantitative background, they have the experience of being able to just sort their data into the software spits back some numbers for you, and then that helps you to sort of decide what those numbers mean. Now, of course, it doesn't do all of the interpretation for you, so there's always a sort of qualitative piece to even using quantitative software. But for qualitative data analysis software, there's even less in the way of the computer doing the work for you, although it does do some really important things about keeping your data together, making it easy to keep track of codes and memos and all the kinds of things that you create when you're doing a qualitative research project. So what can CAQDAS do for you? It can provide a reference point for all your data, no matter where it is on your computer. So if you've got some movies in one folder, you've got some interview data in another folder, you've got some audio recordings just kind of stuck somewhere on your hard drive, the software knows exactly where it is, and it keeps track within the software, not within the file, where pieces of coding have actually happened. So oftentimes when you see some strange numbers within the CAQDAS software, what those numbers are is a reference to where it actually is in the file itself. CAQDAS software can also allow for coding and retrieving, and this is probably the most useful and most used piece of the software. You can go through a transcript or a video or any other kind of media and actually attach codes within the software, and then later on you can use the software to find out where those codes are. You can find out where particular codes overlap, all those kinds of things. So that's really, for most people, the most useful part of what goes on in CAQDAS software. But it can also provide a code book for you. So as you start to collect numerous codes from all over these pieces of media, it can help you stay organized. You can use the same codes across various files to use the same themes and codes throughout your project. It can also often provide a place to create memos about your data. So particularly if you're doing a grounded theory project where memos are kind of an important part of what you're supposed to be doing, the qualitative data can allow you to create memos, type them in, save them in there, attach it to specific codes, specific files, all sorts of ways that memos can be done within the data. Some CAQDAS programs will allow you to do some visual mapping, so you can take codes and link them together and make a sort of org chart or any other kind of network analysis kind of thing. And of course, in modern times, more recently, some actually even have statistical functions so that you can do mixed methods work right within the software. So some of them will allow you to import surveys, do a little bit of basic number crunching, not of course to the level of what you can do with SPSS or SAS or any of those kinds of programs, but at the very least it can do some basic survey analysis and those kinds of things, so you can do a mixed methods project all in one place. Now, one of the things that people are always concerned about is, well, how do I choose which one to use? There's lots of different packages out there. There's NVivo, there's Deduce, there's HyperResearch, there's Atlas TI, I mean, there's on and on and on. Max QDA, which one should I pick? Well, there's a lot of considerations, so lots of factors that you have to consider. One important one is cost. These packages are oftentimes very expensive. Some of them have a kind of monthly fee structure, which for some people is going to be a lot more useful, especially if you only need it for a short while. Something like Atlas TI or InVivo, these are relatively expensive programs up in the close to $1,000 range. Also, factors to consider might be, well, what do some of my collaborators use? So if you're doing a joint project, if somebody else is using Atlas TI, obviously you want to use Atlas TI too, so you can exchange data back and forth. Operating system used to be a really big deal for this software. It used to be that the only Mac qualitative research software, or at least native software, was HyperResearch. In recent times, we've had some actual native Mac apps, in other words, ones that you didn't have to run with Windows emulation software also on your computer. These have come out, Mac versions for InVivo and Atlas TI. So operating system is not as much of a big deal as it used to be, but it's still somewhat something that you want to check and make sure on that you can actually run it on your computer. File formats are also a big consideration. A lot of the software won't actually code PDFs, and PDFs are much more common, especially if you're using sort of already printed matter that you get off of the internet, and being able to sort of take PDFs of web pages, those kinds of things. PDF is a very common format, and so ones like HyperResearch don't actually use PDF files. Whereas something like Atlas TI or InVivo can. So if you need to work with a lot of PDFs, or if you need to work with certain video formats, that kind of thing, which software package you pick up might make a big difference. So check carefully which ones they can use. Also, and this is the most important one, each package is going to shape your cognition in important ways. Now, I'll explain a little bit about what I mean when I talk about HyperResearch in a bit, but the structure of the program, the way that the programmers have put it together and in some ways forced you to interact with it, is going to shape how you actually work with your data, the kinds of possibilities that you have for working with your data. So check these out pretty carefully to see exactly what you can and can't do, the style of working you can accomplish with each particular package. Now, most of these actually have free trial versions, so it's a lot easier to experiment and figure out which one is going to be good for you. And so you can just download them to your computer. They usually have limitations, and we'll talk about some of those limitations in a bit, but the limitations are usually at least good enough for you to do kind of an experimental trial with your actual data to see if it's going to do what you want it to do. Also, now it's important to remember that most have student pricing, so you should take advantage while you're a student of getting some of these packages, especially if you think that you'll do qualitative research on into your professional career. So I'm going to focus particularly on HyperResearch in this one. HyperResearch is not probably the most popular of them, but I think in a lot of ways it's the easiest to learn. It's sort of got the simplest setup, and it's the most easiest to demonstrate. So I'll use HyperResearch for this particular example, but Atlas TI is another one that we highly recommend. InVivo is another that we highly recommend. So just about any of the packages do a really nice job with various types of data, but I'll just use HyperResearch here. It's one that can work on both Mac and Windows computers. So here's really what I'm talking about when I talk about how a program is going to structure your cognition when you're actually doing data analysis. The easiest way to think about data analysis is that it is a kind of cognitive task, right? You're trying to do various activities with data to help you figure out what's going on in it. So it's not magic, you're just kind of like putting a structure in place for your thinking when you're doing data analysis. And the software is actually going to require you to do some of that as well. The thing to remember about HyperResearch is that it is case-based. So you set up the studies that you put into HyperResearch in terms of cases. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be doing case study research, but HyperResearch is trying to chunk parts of the data into separate cases. And I'll show you kind of how you might think differently about doing HyperResearch in a case-based way. So let's say, for instance, you've got a study and you're studying 4 different teachers. And for teacher 1, you've got 3 transcripts that you want to use. For teacher 2, you've got 2 transcripts and a video. For teacher 3, you've got a stack of transcripts and a couple of videos. And for teacher 4, you've got a couple of transcripts, some audio tape, and then some observations from field notes. In HyperResearch, you can structure it just this way. Teacher 1 can be a case, and all of her documents would be underneath that case. Teacher 2, he can be a case, and all of his documents and videos will be in that case. Teacher 3, Teacher 4. So you can kind of separate those out and treat each one as a case. Or you might be able to think of it as if you've got 3 different schools, and in school 1 you've got 4 different teachers, and there's some videos and observations of each one. So that school can be case 1. At school number 2 you've got 3 observations from a couple of different teachers, and then in school 3 you've got 1 teacher with 1 video. Here again, you can structure it in a case-based way by separating these out into schools. So not by the teachers that you've got, but by schools. If you wanted to, you could also take all of these teachers and make each one of these teachers into an individual case. But it requires you in some senses to figure out how you are making cases out of these. And it's so you can, and for these cases, it's important to remember that the codes can go across all of the various cases. So if you're looking for teacher questioning practices, you can have codes for those questioning practices that go for all 3 of the cases, but it's helpful to kind of have those cases separated out so you can see what the questioning practices are in case 1, case 2, and then case 3. But it's also important to remember that in some ways you can get around the case-based aspect because you can just use 1 case. The case could be this 1 school, or the case could be 7 teachers. So you can lump it all into 1 case and get around that. But the nice thing I think about HyperResearch is that the case-based structure can work really nicely if you are doing case studies, or if you do want to kind of separate things out in ways that some of the other packages don't accomplish. Now, as I said, it's structuring your cognition to have the software work in this particular way. The structure encourages you to think in terms of cases. So when you're planning your analysis, in advance, you have to have a kind of sense of case arrangement. So, am I going to put all of my data into 1 single case, or am I going to split it into cases for separate teachers, or separate schools, or separate workplaces, those kinds of things? In advance, you need to make some of those decisions. Now, you can move things around as you go and make changes to the particular cases, so you're not locked in from the very start, but it helps to, in advance, kind of make those cases out so that you can get right into the data, and the management of those cases can be much easier for you. It's also good to realize that in the way that HyperResearch works is it's non-destructive to the files. So in other words, you're not doing something to the original data file itself, the transcript or the video or whatever it is that you're coding. And there's pluses and minuses to this. Now, the pluses are that you can code documents multiple times without the changes being permanent, right? So you wouldn't have to like redo the file and worried that you've messed it up by coding it all, because what HyperResearch is doing is it's keeping a track a record of where those codes should be. It's not actually attaching some sort of code to it physically and destroying the original file. The minuses to that, of course, is that you can't make any minor edits from within HyperResearch. So if you see that you've misspelled a word, or you heard the tape wrong and it didn't make any sense, or the transcriber got things wrong, whatever it is, you can't actually just, fix it right there in HyperResearch. The document has to be fully edited and ready to go before you begin, because you can't, in some ways, destroy or change the file. Again, HyperResearch is just keeping track of where the codes should go. So I want to show you some important parts of HyperResearch and what it looks like when you open it up on the screen. And I'll show you an example in just a few minutes of actually using it, but I'll just kind of pick apart some of the things before we get started. When you open up, the welcome screen will come up, and you can create a new study, and you can pick a previous study that's already been going on. And of course, in that welcome screen there's also some options for help. So I highly recommend the tutorials and some of the online help that are with the program. The main screen of HyperResearch consists of 3 windows. So you'll use these 3 windows most of all. There's the study window that's on the far left. Right in the middle is the code editor, and then on the far right is the source window. And I'll show you a little bit about how each of these windows interacts. In the source window, this is where your media, your field notes, transcripts, movies, audio files, whatever it happens to be, that's where it's going to be read, and where the text is going to be selected and coded. And you can see from this screenshot that you just go through and you highlight various parts of the transcript, and when you code them, down the left hand side of this source window will be the actual codes that are attached to your transcript. And in that middle window, the code editor, that's where you're actually going to create those codes and edit those codes, and where you're going to tell the program to apply them to the text that you've selected in the source window. So as you're going along, you basically just hit create a new code, or you pick a code that's actually in the code book already and hit apply code, and it'll actually attach right there to that source that you were coding. Now, I'd advise you to add descriptions for each of your codes as you make them, and you'll see down at the bottom of the code editor that there's a space for descriptions. You just click in there and start typing. That's a good place for you to define what the code is, when it should be used, and when it shouldn't be used. Then again, all the way over to the far left is the study window. This is kind of where all of the documents and cases and instances of coding are going to be listed for the entire project. So every code is going to be recorded case by case, and I'll show you later on when I do the demonstration where you can kind of go from case to case as you're working. Clicking items here takes you actually to the exact spot of the coded instance. So in this screenshot, if I click open this to changing mind, the one that's highlighted there, it's going to jump right to the exact transcript where that code was put and show me the exact place where it was highlighted. So it's really a very helpful thing to look and see sort of case by case or transcript by transcript, where some of these codes are actually located, and then be able to go back and read the original source. And here's where you can actually write analytical memos that are attached to instances of coding. So when we talked about the code editor, we talked about putting in a code definition. Well, here's a place to attach a memo that describes what you were thinking about a particular place in a particular transcript to put those memos in. In terms of analysis, the main way that you would sort of pull codes together and sort of ask questions, if you will, about all of the codes or a particular code is to run a report. And you can do that by choosing the Reports menu and then click New Report. And it'll give you a series of options that you'll see here on the screen of things you can just check off, and when you hit display it will sort of spit out exactly what you tell it to spit out. So it's this is sort of the most automatic of the analytical processes that you can do, because you can take one particular code, for instance, and have it spit out a report of all the places that that code was used across all of the data, which might be helpful if you're, for instance, writing up your report about the study, because as you're kind of writing about the theme that you're working on, you can see where all of those themes have been coded and pick out good quotations, all those kinds of things. You can also do some analysis by drawing code maps. Now, these code maps are pretty simple, and you're just basically putting in, code names and drawing lines between the code names, so you're kind of manually sort of showing what the connections are between each of these codes. So you can draw some very basic maps. This is not nearly as sophisticated as the network analysis that you can do in, for instance, Atlas TI, but it's at least a very a nice way to do some very simple things if that's all you need. Some more complex things that you can do is the theory builder. It used to be called the hypothesis tester, but theory builder I think is much more in line with what qualitative researchers would normally talk about. This is a very advanced way of working, because you're using various if-then statements, booleans, those kinds of things. And you can get to this by choosing Theory menu, then New Theory. And then put in various codes and if-then statements and all those kinds of things. I won't really be showing you or demonstrating this, but for those of you who are wanting more sophisticated analysis, HyperResearch can actually do it. Now, I've suggested that you try to get the trial versions of these particular software packages, and they all have limitations to the software trials. So make sure that you understand very well how much you can actually do within the trial version before you get started, so that you don't run afoul of it and then have to kind of panic about how you're going to save it. So the limitations for HyperResearch's trial, for instance, there is no time limit, so you can use it for years and years and years if you want to. You can only, however, have 75 codes total. So as you're going through and creating new codes, you can't just sort of create as many codes as you want to, and of course you wouldn't want to necessarily do that anyway. You want to kind of keep those codes to a reasonable number. You can also only have 7 cases maximum across the entire study. So if you've got 8 teachers, you might need to sort of group them in a different way, sort of take those cases and reimagine them instead of having one for each particular teacher. And each case can have no more than 50 code references. So if, say you've got 3 cases, 1 teacher apiece, for teacher 1 you can't actually use more than 50 codes, but over all 3 of those cases you can have a total of 75 different codes, but not more than 50 code instances or quotations that have been picked out in any particular case. That is probably the strictest of the limitations. Now, if you get anywhere close in class to 75 total codes or more than 7 cases, you've probably done something wrong anyway. You shouldn't be getting from just a very limited set of data 75 different codes. Surely those what's going wrong is that you're sort of still too wide open to the data, and that you need to kind of focus in a little bit more and be more selective about specifically what you're looking for within the data and code just that. So I'll demonstrate for you a kind of sample project and how you might go about setting it up and doing some very basic things. I won't go into a whole lot of detail just for time's sake, but hopefully this will be helpful to you in setting up your project. Okay, so here's the demo of the HyperResearch program. First we'll find it on our computer and start it up. And you'll see that the first thing that it does is give you the welcome screen. We'll start a new study, and I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I am going to save it on the desktop, and I am going to call it News Analysis. And in Mac you can also give it some tags. I won't do that here, but you'll see that it brings up two of the windows of HyperResearch, the source window, the project window, which is over to the left. And this is where once we get some things in there, it'll have some sources and some coding instances, those kinds of things. Once we get some codes, we'll have some things here. So what we'll do is we'll go to the sources list, because what we want to do is open up a file that we can go about doing some coding on. So we'll open a text file, and one of the things about HyperResearch that I find somewhat limiting is that it doesn't actually use PDF files, so you have to, or Word documents. So what you have to do is take any Word documents or any other word processing program documents that you have and convert them to just plain text files. So I will go to the desktop here, and in my sample study I'll get interview number 1, open that, and you'll see that the source window opens up with the actual source that you're using right then. An important thing again to remember about HyperResearch is that you can only use one source window at a time. You can't have multiple sources open and code from them at a time. So if you try to open something else, this one will actually close. So it's relatively easy to put in a code. Let's see, we'll take this paragraph here. My husband Michael also has an excellent job, so we'll highlight that with the cursor. And edit code, we'll create a new code, and we will put this as a code name job. Click OK, and you'll see that it adds a code here to job. We can put in a description for our code book. This code is for anything related to work. Then we can come over here and code this, and we'll edit and get a new code, and we'll put it as children. Now you'll notice that we got codes over here, but nothing popped up over here. So what happened is that we didn't apply the code. So another thing about HyperResearch is that you have to do kind of two steps. You have to create the code, and then you have to apply the code. So we'll apply it here, and you'll see that a couple of things happened on the screen. First of all, that code came up over here beside the document to show us that this is coded, but then also over here in the project window, a coding instance occurred. So this is going to keep track of every single instance of coding that happens in any document that we create. So we'll have to go back up here, and we'll get our one about job, and we'll click it there and apply the code. Let's see, if we had something else about jobs here in the business world, especially in my career, always helps to look your best. So we'll code that as job as well. You can double click the code once you've got it created, or you can click apply code again. And let's see, now we have a couple of instances. We have several codes going on. If we needed to edit some of these codes, like if we wanted to call children kids instead, we could just rename it, those kinds of things. One thing that we could also do is we can auto code. Now this sounds really exciting, but it's not as exciting as it might seem. The first thing we'd want to do is we'd pick out the source that we wanted to do. We would pick out the phrases that we wanted, so job, career, pick out the phrases that we think might occur in the transcript. When the phrase is found, you can select some extra characters or words before and after the phrase. So we'll put 3 words and before and after. And then the code that we'll want to do is we'll pick out which code we want to actually put on it. So anytime job, work, or career comes up, it'll code. So we'll hit auto code, and you'll see that 10 new code references were added to the study. And I can show you where those happened. Any place in the transcript where job happened to be up. Now you'll see here that this is one of a good example of where auto coding is not all it's cracked up to be sometimes. Took off 4 to 6 years from work to raise my children. Now that's talking about someone's job, but what if someone was talking about the work it takes to raise children? They're not actually talking about an external career, but they're talking about just the process of working, not a job. The autocode can't distinguish any of that. All it can do is find the actual words that you tell it to find and then apply a code to it. So there are some really helpful things about autocoding, like if you were looking for one particular word, that people, kept calling children monsters, right? If you wanted to have it autocode every time monsters came up, you could do the autocode, and it would find it for you and code it for you. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll open up a new source. We'll open up an image file this time, and I've got one here. A heart device. Now you'll notice the transcript we were working on is now gone. As I said, you can only have one open at a time. Now I'll talk a little bit about how you work with cases. I talked about how HyperResearch is case-based. So in this instance, we've got one case, one of one. So we want to create a new case just to talk about it here. We'll call this one images. So that's another thing you can do. You can call your cases various things, and you can name them by however you're grouping it. You could, for instance, go here and we could rename this case from untitled to interviews. So you can group things case by case in terms of the kind of media it is that you're looking at, the name of a teacher, the name of a school, the name of a workplace, however you're doing your cases. So we'll go back to images here, and what you can do with images in order to code them is you draw boxes inside the image, and then you actually put a code to the box. So in this case, maybe we'll apply the code children. You'll note again that over here in the project window, that instance of a code pops up on the screen, and it gives you a position, and again that's just telling the computer where to find it within that particular source in all the code of digits, ones and zeros that are in that file. We can also open a movie or an audio file, and here we'll take maybe a clip.
If we are lucky, we eat every day. Food is one of those things that is part of living, and our next guest says may need more attention.
Okay, so to code a piece of video in HyperResearch, what you do is you hold down the Shift key while you're dragging on the slider, and you'll see that down here at the bottom on the the timer, it'll put in a little gray bar to show that that's what you've selected. Then you'll go over here and you'll pick out whichever code, apply the code, and you'll notice that it comes up, and it's within the movie that you'll have that. So we'll close that out there. Now, one of the nice things that you can do with any CAQDAS software is that you can actually go through and go back to a particular piece of coding. So over here in the project window, we'll just hit this particular code, and you'll notice that it opens up the interview transcript and shows us where we had gone through and coded it before. So if you're ever looking for an instance of a particular code, that's all you have to do is just click on it and you can find it. And another thing we can do, of course, is that we can do a new theory with the theory builder. I won't show you that, but you can also run reports, such as a frequency report. And this is good for the quantitatively minded or people doing mixed methods approaches. You can see the number of times that a particular code has been used. It's actually got a little histogram bar graph on the side. You can do some various things with it. And then you can also use the report builder here and pick out various things that you want to know about things. So for instance, let's say we wanted to look at all the codes. And we can do a study overview. We can display report, and what we'll get is a list of all the places where it's coded. But what we can do is we can also put in an annotation and the coded source text. So any of those kinds of things that come up. So if you're looking just for all the places where job was coded, it'll pick out all the source material that you've linked to it, and if you want to, you click those hyperlinks there and it takes you right to the transcript from that report. So it can be a really helpful way of going about it by doing those reports. So that's sort of some basic things about how HyperResearch can help you. I hope you'll download it yourself, use the trial version or Atlas TI or any of the others that have trial versions, and see how these programs can help you do your coding.